and welcome back to Psychologist Casual Review. And today I wanted to review an article I found very interesting. This article is in a grouping of articles named Understanding in Psychoanalysis, in French, Comprendre en Psychanalyse. So this article is by Daniel Widlöcher, which I had already talked about on this channel. And the article is Understanding, is it our metapsychology? Or trying to understand, is it our metapsychology? So just a quick recap before we dig into the text itself, which is quite short, 10 pages. So metapsychology, just for those who don't know, is the idea that it's psychology beyond psychology. It's theory for the sake of theory and on human emotions, thinking, and drives. It's not necessarily there to be used for patients, but it's there almost as a theoretical, as some people badmouth it by saying it's almost religious, but there is an aspect of it that goes beyond psychology. It's therefore a framework which is something of, you have to put your faith into it, or at least you have to take it with boxing gloves when you use it. You can't just say it's the truth. It's a construct. And in this very short article, Widlöcher comes back to the question of meaning, which he had already talked about in Metapsychology of Meaning. But here he's not interested in that. He's interested in, is the fact of giving meaning when you're a psychoanalyst, when you're a psychotherapist of psychodynamic orientation, is it our metapsychology, what we now would call just a belief? Is it what we're aiming for? Is it what we're trying to do? Is to understand the patient? And that question is, I felt, very, very interesting for so many reasons, because understanding has become, in a way, the guideline. We, in a way, have to understand. It's the baseline and the objective of our forms of psychotherapy. And it does ask the question, has it become, in a way, a belief, like a religious mantra? And in the article, he does talk about the fact that more and more a psychoanalysis has gone on. It's been less about just a pure form of, I understand as the therapist and I impose that on the patient. It's become an open-ended and more subtle form of dealing with things, where the understanding is both correlated to the patient's acceptance of that understanding and of the feelings of the therapist, which we've come a long way, as he states in the article, because it did not start like that. It started as Freud himself started by saying that the feelings of the therapist has towards the patients, be it positive, negative. I'm not talking about feelings in a romantic sense, that's completely something else. But just like saying things like, I'm interested, I'm flabbergasted, I'm surprised, I'm bizarre, all of those things were seen as an obstacle. And he does say that countertransference, which we now call countertransference, was seen as a hindrance that needed to go beyond, that we had to go beyond the simple aspect of relationship to understand the whole patterns. And that's why it became interesting, is that he said that since then, there's been so many movements, so many schools of thought, and basically we have moved on and been much more integrative of the relationship between patient and professional, that basically we're not just into understanding, we're into the relationship side of things within the psychotherapy. And he does say that there is a risk by going into that relationship aspect of it, is basically we are at the risk of just making it a conversation. Therefore, you always have to keep in mind the unconscious aspect of it, but never in that way of trying to superimpose what is in your mind or the hypothesis onto the patient, but trying to build with the patient. He does use the very interesting word in French, co-penser, which would be translated by co-thinking, meaning you think not for the patient, but with the patient. You're co-thinking. You're both thinking about the problem and the solution at hand. The understanding has no meaning if it's only the therapist that understands it. And if he tries to give an intellectual built up, an intellectual dry in his professional psychoanalytic language, it's not going to work. And Widlöcher points that out, that you can't just state something like, oh, it's the Oedipal complex, or it's the imagos going through. You have to co-build it. Like, even if you use those words in the sessions, you cannot just use them for the sake of using them. The patient needs to understand those words, or create his own words, his own metaphors, his own way of dealing with sins. And through those metaphors, through those images, we build together with the patient the whole framework of understanding. And understanding is not there for the sake of understanding, it's also there in line with the relationship. And he also goes into the whole history of understanding and that whole relational aspect of the therapy, speaking about Ferenczi, how Ferenczi, which was a disciple of Freud, was into the belief that he could guess what his patients were saying, and that there was like some kind of communication from mind to mind, which Freud was very ambivalent. He pushed back a lot on those ideas, but he also kind of felt interested, even though he felt that it had to remain hidden, that psychoanalysis would be destroyed or at least mocked if ever it came out. And the whole point with Ferenczi is that he really believed that there was a mirror communication, but it's not quite like that. It's more an asymmetric communication, but a communication that's still very valid and still very important, because it's that co-communication that will allow patient and therapist to grow together within this frame of the therapy. Because that's another thing that's often not pointed out, is that the patient grows, and that's the whole objective, but the therapist grows as well. If you stay exactly the same therapist as you were at the start of therapy with a patient, is that a success? He never says that, Widlöcher, but those are the associations that I had when I read the text. And I found it very, very interesting that he goes on to say that this shouldn't be a dogma, this shouldn't be a truth, but something that has to reach and has to be fulfilled both by the therapist and by the patient, of having an understanding. An understanding is not a dogma. An understanding comes from the depth of the relationship and gives it, in a way, a meaning that's deeper than just a truth. Anyway, I hope you liked it. It was a much, much shorter article and a much shorter form than what I usually do, so I hope you liked it. And I'm also going to use the bit of time that's left to say that I'm going to try and make more videos, and less necessarily on books that I'm going to read. I'm still going to keep that, but I'm also going to do more thought-based videos or on topics. And there you go. So once again, I wish you a happy new year, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.